There is no inherent difference between someone who's homeless and yourself. The only difference is the systemic racism that they themselves or their ancestors have faced that have put them in this vulnerable position. Homelessness is so prevalent because there's groups of people who don't believe that everyone deserves a safe place to live.
At Simpson Housing Services, we house, support, and empower people impacted by homelessness. First and foremost, I have to say that doing this work is humbling in that the more you do, the more that you realize needs to be done.
In 2017, we held an all-staff meeting to come together and think through and identify priorities for our agency. Racial justice was one of them, and out of that meeting, it was decided that we would focus on racial justice, both internally and externally, and that was the Racial Justice Task Force.
Minnesota is a state of 80% white people, and the amount of people that I work with at the shelter is 60+% non-white people is heartbreaking to me. On face value, racism is a leading cause of homelessness, and particularly in Minnesota. I think Simpson does a wonderful job of being able to communicate that internally, where we can let that internal talk transform into passion, and that passion then leads us to work harder and to fight against racial disparities in Minnesota.
I think the importance of addressing homelessness and racism together is that those are the two things that have the biggest impact on where we live and how well our neighbors do. And so if your goal is to live a life and raise a family and build relationships in a community, you have to start with both addressing racism and addressing housing, and you can't address housing without addressing racism.
Because of the demographics of participants using our services are mainly people of color, it's incredibly important that our staff are knowledgeable about those issues. One of the ways that we do that is we require 12 hours of mandatory racial justice and anti-racism training. We are stronger as a country, as a community, when everyone is thriving.
What I wish people knew about racism is that it's not abstract. It's not something that's just like over there. Racism is something that we all carry a little bit of it, and it's in all of our institutions and all of our systems. But when you understand that and you can start to pick it apart, there's a lot of opportunities there.
When volunteers can come to our trainings and come to the shelter and they can experience what it's like to sit with someone who's experiencing homelessness firsthand, it no longer becomes a stigma or a bias, it becomes real life. And when we can put ourselves in situations where there's real life around us, then we tend to have more compassion. And when we have more compassion, it gives us more strength to be vulnerable, which leads to change.
Doing this work, you have lots of hard days, but I think you have more inspiring, positive, empowering days. Seeing how people are growing, how they're supporting their own families, how they're transitioning out of our programs into permanent housing will always be inspiring and what motivates me to do the work.
You can't focus on being right. You have to focus on getting it right, which means that your authentic journey is going to look unique from anybody else's.